It's also worth pointing out that if you, I mean, the obvious advantage and recommendation for studying often in smaller chunks is because that's how we deliver the information to you, right? So when we go to class, we have a syllabus, right, and we follow up with particular topics, as Stan mentioned. If you are rereading and sort of revisiting that material that same day, it will reside much more freshly in your memory. You will remember your professor actually saying, make sure that this is important, right? Or these particular 3 aspects are key to understanding how genetic variation in populations translates to natural selection, or something like that, right? You actually do remember those things in class, and then it's sort of, you integrate that, you incorporate that into your study, into your evaluation of the material. If you have a week's worth of material, these lines become blurry, right? Things are becoming how does this relate to the other? Yeah, I don't remember. Now I have to go back and sort of reassess how individuals vary in order to understand this other thing. So, yeah, I think
if it gets out of hand and you do get too much, it's not hopeless though. You can always go back and say, okay, what are my learning objectives? And so I've got this plethora, I've got this pile of notes, and I don't know this material, and it's hard for me to organize them. And always go back and say, okay, what are the learning objectives? These are the things that your instructor says, hey, this is what I want you to learn, and these are the things I want you to master, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do on the test. So you can take that material and kind of categorize it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to go back and rewrite my notes, reorganize them, say, okay, I'm looking at this carbohydrate, we're talking about, polymers and monomers, and I'm like, oh, look at these carbohydrates, these are some examples, what are they? Link it to, okay, here, this fits with this. This piece of information fits here. So you can have your little headings or your learning objectives and put what's kind of underneath that and categorize it. And then maybe once you get these categories, say, well, how does this category relate to that category? Like a connector and say, oh, well, these are monomers, these are polymers. Oh, these monomers, they're the components of the polymers. And something like that. So you're making connections, like you're organizing it, grouping it, connecting it. Yeah. Help you get back to where you were.
Would you say that, more like specifically with Bio 160, would you say that the tests are more like situational based or like facts?
Or scenario based,
Or
perhaps?
scenario, yeah.
A mix.
Mix.
One of our goals in 150 and 160, maybe our primary goal, is not, our goal is not to fill your head full of information. That's for you to do. But our goal is to get you comfortable with using that understanding and knowledge, being able to do something with it, work with it. And that's what learning really is about. So that will be on the exams, application.
So study to understand, not just to memorize, if that makes sense.
It's a fine line. Often it's necessary to memorize
In order to understand.
in order to understand it. But if you just stop with the memorization, where you can give the definition of every term that we've dealt with, but you don't know how they fit together, you don't know how they relate, how they interact, then you're not there yet. You're not yet able to work with it.
Do you recommend retaining what we read in the textbook and then also juggling what our professor said as well as the background information that we read in our textbook and what to focus on? So then, as you said, it's not all about memorization, but again, it's biology, so you do have to memorize each other.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so how do we juggle what we read in the textbook and then what our professor says, as well as knowing what we need to memorize and tie that into what we understand?
Focus on the learning objectives. Let the learning objectives be your guide.
Yes.
So using the textbook, using our activities and time in class, they're all aiming towards helping you to be able to achieve those learning objectives. So let that be your guide.
Yes.
So in the back.
Yeah.
This is for Mr. Guffey. If you were,
I'm sorry?
if you were a student and you were in your class, how would you be taking notes? Would you be doing it with the clicker questions or taking from the book?
How would I be taking notes? I would have my learning objectives with me in class. Probably one learning objective per notebook page, or maybe two on a page with some space for me to write underneath them. Because in class, we're going to be working on those tools to allow you to achieve. So that those learning objectives, I will sometimes put them on a slide, or we're having a thinking as a biologist. I will specify the learning objective, but sometimes I won't. But if you're familiar with those learning objectives, then you should be able to know that what we're talking about right now addresses this particular learning objective. This may not be answering the question. Taking notes is it's highly variable. You know, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. I tend to be a limited note taker, always have, because I'm dysgraphic. I can't write very well. So mine have to be keywords that I put together, and that worked for me. But you can also waste a lot of time taking notes and reading the text. You can spend an enormous amount of time writing out what's already written out for you in the text. So maybe again focusing on keywords.
I think this brings up an excellent point, because these courses and you know, not only biology but everything else is not a matter of you necessarily rewriting the same information and sort of regurgitating it the way it was written, but instead understanding it. So first you have to decompose that written information into key elements, as Stan mentioned, and then find ways, as you mentioned, Krista, in a way to connect those, right, meaningfully. It doesn't matter if you connect them through 3 phrases that are written out in a textbook beautifully with 2 associating graphs, right? That's what the textbook is for. It has 700 pages, right? We in class have 50 minutes to just shrink it into its core elements. So, and you in turn have to shrink it even further into 5 hallmarks. So that's why I think I've tried something new this semester. Maybe it would backfire and maybe not, but I am actually trying to do that with students in class. 1, 2, 3 keywords, sort of concept maps, and then trying to connect them together and see how they play around in this whole grand scheme of the topic that we talk about.
Yeah, I don't think rewriting or
Yeah.
printing the textbook is a good idea. I wouldn't do that probably.
Yeah, neither would I. I mean, I've seen students come to me after their first or second, usually it's second or third exams, and they say, Dr. Nyari, look, and they open up these beautiful notebooks, beautiful handwriting. I mean, my handwriting is just disastrous, and they have these beautiful handwritten and highlighted and remade graphs from the book, and yet they still struggle. And I try to tell them, this is, how have you been studying? Well, I read the textbook and I took notes. That's good, but you then have to step back, you have to leave those notes behind, and you have to go here or on another piece of paper and use those learning objectives and say, explain how variation in individuals is related to natural selection. That's when you have to then sit down on your own, and this is, by the way, a good strategy for the exam as well, because it's going to be time. So the amount of time that you need to spend, or that you're allowed to spend on each question, relies on your understanding of the material, right? So you need to know, boom, variation. Okay, what does that mean? Well, there needs to be some differences within this population, right? You need to bring that in. You need to bring in other elements of the environment, maybe, that some individuals that have some traits are better than others. So you need to, or suited better in those environments, right? So you need to deconstruct things for it to make sense and then rebuild it, right? You need to reinvent the wheel, so to say. Teach yourselves, and that takes a lot of effort, and that's why we sort of keep advocating for weekly, repeated reviews of the material, you know, because that's at some point it's like sports or playing an instrument. Right? What do you do when you go to become a professional tennis player, like Serena Williams? What do? You just exercise and exercise and exercise until you have blisters on your hand. Same thing you need to do with biology,
Your head
chemistry.
should get hot when you study. Whoa, you're burning ATP
and then things become a reflex, right? Then you are able to respond to a cross-court shot by just going. So, oh yeah, I know that. You know, that's when this comes in. Right, so you probably will not maybe reach that level here in introductory biology, but we are hopeful that you will reach that level later on as soon as possible, you know, to be very.
So I don't want you all to not take notes, though.
Yeah.
So when we're saying don't rewrite the textbook, please in class, take notes.
and use the learning
Write stuff
objectives as
down.
your template. And, you know,
Write everything.
getting back to textbook, how do you all read a textbook? Do you open it up to chapter 1 and look at the first word of the first sentence of the first paragraph, which might be the or something? Yeah.
I like get what you're saying with the like learning objectives and not writing down each word. Because what I like used to do, which I should probably stop doing, is that I would like start with like that opening story to get a general information of what we're talking about, and then I'd read the paragraph and then decide what in that paragraph was really what I need to take from that topic. But I wasn't sure what I'm being tested on, so I end up just taking everything that they talk about.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to find a way to really find out what's actually important, because they're going to give you a lot of words, and what words are important, what words I need to remember. So how would you say to, after reading or maybe even going over the slides that the teachers like give you, how do you know what's important and what's not?
The learning objectives. The learning objectives.
Yeah, if there's a paragraph in there that's not related to one of those learning objectives, ditch that.
That doesn't say that it's uninteresting or unimportant, or maybe part of the narrative that you're reading through. But if it's not addressing those learning objectives, and I want to get back to reading a textbook, though. If you're assigned a certain amount of material, I encourage you to not just sit down and commence reading right off the bat. I suggest that you take 2 to 3 minutes to look at the chapter, to look at the
Look at the
major
headings.
headings and subheadings. Look at the illustrations. If an illustration draws you in, by all means, read the caption. If it doesn't draw you in, don't. Okay? What you've done in that 2 to 3 minutes is neurons have begun to hook together in your brain. Your brain now has some idea of what's coming.
Organization.
It's, you may not feel that you know much about that chapter, and you probably don't. But your brain now has some idea of what's coming. It's prepared now. It's got a little framework to begin hanging that understanding. Really, really important, I think, to get the brain prepped.
And your book, by the way, has these little skeletonized sort of concept maps, like flowcharts, right? Latch onto those, you know. And if there's something that's talking about, additional detail in, protein synthesis, or we don't cover that in Bio 150 in that detail, right? Or meiosis, the phases of meiosis and mitosis. If we didn't talk about that in class, it's there, yeah, cool. I learned about that if you're interested in it, but it will most likely not be on the exam, right? In this particular course. So yeah, that's an excellent point on priming yourself for those learning objectives.
Something I always did as well again, because writing is difficult for me, I would prepare a list of all the relevant terms for a particular topic. So we're dealing with meiosis and mitosis as it pertains to 150. I would write out a list of all of the relevant terms involved in that. Might run to 3 pages. I wouldn't write any definitions. I would just write the words. And I would go through my list. Do I know what this means? Do I know what this means? If I didn't, I'll go back. Okay, I'm not exactly clear what this sister chromatid is. Okay, so I go back. Okay, I now know what it is. Now, once I'm clear on all the terms, I can begin to start connecting them to each other and telling a story. And eventually, I try to get to the point where I could blindly land my finger on a word, and I could tell the entire story about mitosis and meiosis relevant to the course from that starting point. So I might have landed on, who knows what I landed on. But whatever word I landed on, I could get to everything else from that word. Then I would feel comfortable that I understood it. And I can come at it from any direction.
When you're
It takes practice.
pointing out something that I wanted to, because I think a lot of people spend a huge amount of time, prepping the material and trying to learn or understand or memorize the material, but then that's where they stop. And they come to the exam and they practice the recall for the very first time. They don't do what Stan's talking about, pointing blindly to a word and saying, now, without my notes, can I explain all that? Can I connect these words? Can I tell the story? So you need to practice that. Get to a point where you think, okay, I understand this chunk. I understand this well. I got it. Put everything away. Try to draw it. Try to explain it out loud. Pretend you're teaching it to your teddy bear. I don't know. If you've got a study partner, this works great. If you find, okay, I got this far and I've flopped, go back to your notes. Practice your understanding again. And say, okay, now I got it. Put it away. Go at it again. You'll get a little bit further. You flop. You go back to the notes. Go back to the, again, trying to tell the story. Eventually you'll be able to recall it. You can move on. All right, move on to another chunk. Do the same thing. You got to practice, test yourself is basically what I'm saying. Don't let the test be the first time you actually try to recall that. Because that's what the test is actually need to do. It's not just did you memorize or did you understand this, but can you actually pull it back out and articulate that information back to me.
And that,
And it's not just regurgitation, it's going to be,
I think
it's more like recall.
that brings up a very another important point that I would like to mention because I've been there. It's this false sense of sort of self-security, right? You read something and you say, oh yeah, I know this, let's move on. And then even when you do those recalls, right, your brain tries to get out of it, you know, it weasels out, it says, RP, you know that, move on to something else. So what you mentioned, if you sit down with a study partner, you know, even if with the teddy bear it's less helpful because sometimes because it doesn't ask you to say something, you know, but if the partner then comes to you and says, hey Jason, you know, you didn't connect, you didn't carry across that message well, all right? That makes you say, oh, okay, well, if Jason, you know, if Mike didn't understand what I said, you know, then I need to review this, right? I need to make it more clear. I need to go back and revisit that phase or that stage where, oh, it becomes a blur as to how meiosis 2 comes into play or whatever. So yeah, sometimes we lend ourselves into a false feeling of safety when we read our own handwritings, right? You know your notes because you wrote them, right? That's why when you have a volume of, a novel written that mimics the book, you recognize it, but you can't recall it, right? So you recognize your handwriting, but how it all connects might get lost. So.
I wouldn't even recognize my own hand.
Some of us have trouble with that too. Yeah, but, yeah. So, any other questions?
Yeah, let's see some other.
Back or?
Not that we don't like your very good, insightful questions. Please.
Oh, I can go?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to know, so do you guys get the instructors get the test from somewhere, or do they write it themselves?
We write.
You guys think of the questions? Do you guys go through the textbook and like get questions from there, or are you like just basically in class content?
In class
No,
content.
anything that, yeah. In-class content, our own
Learning
interests,
objectives.
you know, we might flop in an example from something that we've read from somewhere else that is relevant to that. You see me especially do that kind of stuff.
I
Safe
try.
warning, but I throw in things from somewhere else, you know. I'm not gonna ask you about necessarily Darwin's finches and natural selection. I might ask you about Hawaiian honey creepers or snails or something else. So,
Parsons.
yes.
So then you guys were talking about the fact that some information in the textbook doesn't apply to the test because it's not something that's reviewed in class. Would it be smarter to go from, like say, I don't know if everyone's a professor like those PowerPoints, but the PowerPoints that you go through in lecture, is it smarter to go from there to get your information, or?
For my class, definitely,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
Well, again, it's, you have multiple venues
But just take it a step
for helping you
further.
understand those learning objectives. So I say both.
Mm-hmm.
But for 150, it's particularly an issue because we do treat of mitosis and meiosis, but we have a specific objective in mind, and that's what's happening to the chromosomes. What are the outcomes? How do they differ, and why does it matter?
Genetic variation.
Okay, yeah, we're going for genetic variation, we're going for population level phenomena. We assign you some material that pertains to meiosis, mitosis in general. You're reading about the spindle apparatus, chromatin. Keep in mind the description of the course, of what the course is. That spindle apparatus is very fascinating and very important, but not relevant to 150.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to know. And so there's the point of the slides is they can sort of help you that, you know, he didn't say metaphase one time. Didn't say it. Or prophase. He talked about the chromosomes and what's happening to the chromosomes. So that's probably what's important.
So what we usually do, we synthesize the textbook, right, with other, well, textbook is actually also coming from primary literature, right? Somebody who actually studied the spindle apparatus.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of synthesis going on, and we try to summarize these main learning objectives in those slides that you should use as a core guideline of what is essential at this point in time in this course. You might read your textbook, and as Stanley mentioned, you know, they might talk about, you know, prometaphase, even some other sub-phases, which I don't even remember, in all honesty, because you know, I've been working on that. We don't know everything either, but it's not the purpose of this course. In genetics, you would be dissecting that even greater than or 160. Yes.
Other than understanding and recalling the biological processes, would you say it's also just as important to recall, like, the people who came up with that, the dates when they were born?
You know,
I love the people, but I
Yeah.
don't love the names.
I like to approach science from a history of the understanding, from intellectual history. I've noticed over the years that many students don't.
Yeah, they.
But in any case, I never made any emphasis on when, but in sequence of events.
Yeah, kind of like a
Okay.
development.
So, and there are a few dates that a body probably ought to know. 1859 is probably pretty important. That's when On the Origin of Species was published. 1953, Watson and Crick publishing their model of the structure of DNA. That's probably something. But we're not going to ask you that
I
on the
don't see
exam.
any dates.
Yeah, you will not see any of that on the
Yeah.
exam. But it sort of goes to the point of placing things into context, right? Darwin had no idea about DNA, right? About Watson and Crick. He knew that there was something in there that had to be inherited, but you know, he didn't know anything about that. So
Or
that,
men.
or men, right? So that
That's
helps
really
you
cool. That's what's so fascinating.
place things into context as well, right? You know that when you talk about natural selection in a scenario, maybe it's given to you, you can tie it to something more on the phenotype, right? Or some other. It doesn't necessarily have to talk about the views, right? You can have a conversation, or genetics. You can have a conversation about selection purely on features, on traits, on behaviors, on things like that.
But if you have sort of a history of ideas bent, that is sort of the way you like to approach things, by all means do so, but don't get bogged down in dates.
Yeah.
Because that is one good way to organize it. You know, when did we learn this? When did we discover this? What new
Yeah, I mean, that's a
vistas
strength
did
you
this
have.
discovery open up? Yeah,
Then you
definitely
should
utilize
Yeah,
that.
capitalize on that for sure, yeah.
Do you guys usually test on like who came up with that concept?
No. No. The concept is all that matters. You understanding it. These people have laid the groundwork. Many others are doing research on these things now. We don't have, we can't really. When we give credit where credit is due, right? In some instances, but
I introduced the concept of ODPWMs in my class at some point. Old Dead Privileged White Men that litter the history of science. And that's what I call them. Because again, I have this historical bent. And we do associate ideas with discoverers of those concepts and ideas. But if it isn't your bent, that's not important. It's the concepts and the temporal sequence.
yeah, how those ideas
Not the
evolve.
specific date, but Darwin predated the Watson and Crick model. That's probably worth knowing which came first.
Pre-Darwin came, ideas of Lamarck
Yeah.
and then Plato, Aristotle, things like that.
And other old dead privileged white men.
So this is off topic, but I encourage mine to get active when they're reading. So not just sitting in a chair all comfy with your highlighter or whatever and highlighting away, because if you do that, I don't know if you're like me, you'll read that paragraph and you're like, what did I just read?
Yeah.
And you read it again, like, oh, what did I just read? Right? So I probably looked like a crazy person, but I stood up a lot. And I walked around a lot when I was reading, and it just gets the blood flow going, and it keeps you more awake and more focused. And I read things out loud, so I was activating more senses, right? So you're seeing it, and you're hearing it, and you're saying it. I don't know, that's just something to add to the reading thing.
And when you need to take a break, take a break. Because if you need to take a break from your studying and you don't take a break, you're probably wasting your
spinning
time.
your wheels, right?
Yes, sir.
How's the exam going to be structured?
How's the exam going to be structured? So, again, I think we briefly mentioned this. So it's going to be a combination of, multiple choice type questions which we write, and then story-based or image-based or some scenario-based questions where you will have to write maybe a single word that connects some ideas, or even a sentence or a small paragraph. So expect those things, yes. Yeah.
Lovely drawings.
Yeah. I mean, you might even have to
You're going to
put.
be drawing stuff, so
Right.
practice drawing.
You might even have to put, labels on axes, or just draw the trend in these two axes, or whatever have you, right? Now I will make one mention here because it's been brought up by, I think, this lady who now left, unfortunately, because we write our own exams, okay? I am not a native English speaker. I started learning English at the age of, in 5th grade, right? So I've had quite a bit of experience with English, I'm safe to say, but I still am not that good at it. So if I want to express something and it doesn't carry across well, in that question, you have doubts about, well, what is he trying to ask here? Ask during the exam, okay? Don't assume anything. Don't just read the question and say, oh, I thought he meant that. No. If you're unsure, It's better to just raise your hand and say, Dr. Nyari, what are you trying to get at? You know, read all the answers, the provided answers for the multiple choice question, and say, you know, are you looking for a deconstruct the sentence, okay? If you are looking for a keyword or something, with some help, you know, we can provide that. It's not, what I'm trying to say is that during an exam, there is no hard barrier between us and you. You know, we just don't dump things on you and, oh, okay, go.
Good luck.
You know, good luck.
I do
right?
know sometimes, that's a big reason people miss questions though, is that
Exactly,
they
yeah.
don't understand what the question
Right.
was in fact asking.
Or a word, like for instance, we might use
Yeah.
instinct or because
They
we
miss that a lot.
publish things, you know, we write articles ourselves, we oftentimes have sort of a vocabulary that's more biological, right?
Right.
So we might say selected or drift or proliferation, and you have no idea what the heck that is in that moment, right? And you say, Dr. Nyari or Dr. Guffey, or what is this? You know, can you give me a synonym to this word, or can you please help me latch on to what the essence of this is? Okay, so don't feel. What I'm trying, guys, don't feel shy and don't feel sort of like there is no communication between us. All right? Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Because you guys write your own exams, and sometimes we might not understand what you guys are saying, is it a disadvantage to go, if you know the concept you're trying, if we know the concept that you're trying to teach us, is it a disadvantage to go on like YouTube or somewhere else to get a better understanding for it?
By all means.
I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage, however,
I encourage it.
be aware of extra
information
that's
go in
being
there.
pulled in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The YouTube video might,
Focus on something that we're not.
all right, it might have 30 seconds here that are relevant in the beginning of the sequence, right? So you might have something important here, and 2 seconds at the end, right? You're watching all of that spool video, and the person's talking about who knows what, which we didn't cover in class.
Or they're covering it more detail.
Or more detail.
Less detail, or from a different,
It might be helpful, but
You have multiple resources available to you, no question about it.
There's a lot of it.
And the question is becoming efficient
this is
and
key.
developing the skills to identify where you yourself are perhaps lacking. So there's where you might want to utilize these additional resources. And your time is very precious to you. And your time is very important to us. We don't want you wasting your time. We want you using your time effectively. Don't have any hard and pat answers to that type of a question. You're going to have to decide where those types of resources can benefit you and where it's really kind of a waste of your time because some of it's not relevant.
Could be
some of
accurate
it's
as well.
Maybe exactly.
yeah,
That's
maybe
the point.
some of it's intended for a high school class. Well, you're not in high school anymore. You might need a little more depth. So,
Yeah.
Khan Academy is good. Have you guys heard of that?
yeah.
Khan Academy, yeah, recommended.
Academy, they've got some good stuff. It's pretty accurate as well.
And if all else
Bozeman
fails,
Science is good. I love him. Mr. Anderson.
if all this fails, there's always your ultimate resource,
Come to the professor.
us. Okay, we know what we talked in class. We even know what we have forgot to talk about in class.
Yeah.
Okay? So we can tell you, oh, that time we
You
didn't quite.
forgot to mention.
Right, we didn't quite, you know, we had to,
That's
I had to
right.
finish early, you know, because I ran out of time. So here, you guys read this, and next time maybe we will come back to that, hopefully. But if all else fails, you know, if the notes, the lecture slides, the notes, the textbook, YouTube, let's put YouTube there, good resources, all of those are still, you know, they don't get you to where you want or where you need, by all means. Open up your UTK email, Dr. Nyari, the exam is on Friday. You know, here we are, Tuesday, can I drop by your office for 30 minutes? I will guarantee you that our doors are open
Well, and
to
you can
these
do
kinds of
that
inquiries.
as the semester progresses too. Like, you don't have to wait until you're
Yeah,
studying
yeah.
for the exam too. You can do that from week one.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm covering this material. I noticed you have an office hour. I'm gonna come in here and see if I'm getting this, down right.
The fact is, right before the exam, we might not be able to fit you in.
Yeah, you should do
Because
it
we may have 27
soon.
students that are trying to get in.
Regular.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
How many questions are due on the test? And since it is a time test, how much time?
It varies.
It does
Yeah.
vary per
Yeah.
professor.
So it depends on how the professor structured their syllabi. So, for instance, there's a set number of points assigned for exams. We usually split those in however many midterms we have, right? They should all be listed in the syllabus. Usually, I tend to assign 3 points per question. I forget now. Yeah, but so like multiple choice questions usually are 2 or 3 points. And then short answer ones are, I don't know, it varies on how I feel in breaking those down.
We're not, we try to not create an exam that students can't finish.
Yeah.
we don't want it
But
to
our
take long.
target is, to be honest, the student who is well prepared should have no difficulty. There are often students who are crunched for time, and that's probably indicative of just not quite being fully clear
It's a
on the
fine line
concept.
too, because you
Yeah.
want, the more questions you have, the less points per question they are.
Yeah,
So-
smaller stakes.
So then you make a mistake, you're gonna get penalized less versus less questions, more points.
I mean, the bottom line, there's a lot of variance.
Mine are usually.
We'll talk about variance.
I do about 48 multiple choice, 120 points, and then 30 points is gonna be the short answer usually.
But we're not, one thing that we're
And that's
not,
usually-
we're not out to hurt you. We are not out to hurt you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, whatever approach we take to not hurting you, there's a range of variance. We have
Yeah.
tried to make it where there's sufficient time to complete the exam, and that the coverage is reasonably complete relative to our application. Yeah.
Do professors' quizzes are a good indication of like the wording of the questions as well as like their testing style, or do you think they'll provide like a practice question thing or a study guide or something?
My quizzes probably are not reflective of the exam, to be honest. My thinking as a biologist probably are. So my quizzes tend to be lower level stuff, definitional knowledge, unless we're solving problems.
So your exams are harder.
No, I said my thinking as a biologist question.
Yeah, you had a question too, sorry, yes.
Yeah, so what are some tips for like short answers? Because sometimes you just don't know what to put. So what would y'all say?
You,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if it makes sense, right? If it's,
I try to get points for anything I can.
you know,
so-
if
We
you,
got part of the way there. Then.
Yeah, you.
What was her question? I didn't.
if we get partial credit
On short answer.
on short answers, yeah. I mean, on short answers, yes, but if, for instance, you have a fill in the blank with one term, right? We're looking at something specific, right? So, there's a, I mean, if you misspell it or something like that, fine. If you're on the right path, we understand.
I get a certain amount of points just for an attempt. I mean, it's not much, it's a half a point, but
Yeah.
just putting something, you're gonna get at least a half a point.
Again, we have something in mind, so obviously there's an imbalance here. Because when we write the question, we have something in mind. It never fails that I have a short answer question where I get a good answer. It's like, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I've had that.
That's a good one. So no, that's, putting down a good answer does not necessarily mean, I'm not sure what you want here. It's like, well, I'm sure what I want, but what you put down may not be what I want, and it may be real good.
Make it points in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, sorry.
Is there like an exam for anything, or does it vary on professor?
What is that?
If there are curves on the exams, it's personally I dislike curves. It's I usually do not.
I don't curve the exams.
I'll defer the question. I do a number of things, none of which, you know what a curve is? What is a curve?
Depends. I mean, in high school it was different, but like I've had different teachers do different. Like in high school, if our average in the class was real low, the highest was 85, and that 85 will go up to 100. The 15 points will be added on to everyone who did it. Like I made a 35 at 100, I'll get that extra 15 to be up at a 50. But that 85 person will be at 100. And my government teacher did it differently. Like every question you miss, like how Professor
Someone always
Russell
makes
said,
100.
she'll give half
Just
points
like
for every
right
question
to
you
you.
miss. So you
Gives
put
a
down something,
calculator
she'll
every
get half
time.
points.
Yeah.
But also a curve is normalizing a distribution, where you have a fixed percentage of A's and F's and they're equal, and they're not very many. Okay, and that's another way of curving, taking whatever the grade distribution is and mathematically making it a normal distribution. The problem with that is you might not, your relative position may go down.
Yes.
You might have an 85 and you've got a D. So that doesn't seem fair. So I certainly don't do that.
A lot of people miss a question. I'll throw out a question.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I've done
So,
Yeah, a part about your notion of curving, I will share what I do. If 85% of the students miss the question, I feel like I have to take responsibility for that question.
I would take responsibility
Either
for
I
that.
worded it incorrectly or
Right.
something,
Well, something.
and everybody gets that credit for that.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like what you do like with the clickers, like if a lot of people miss it, then like you re-poll it, so people have like another opportunity to answer it.
Yeah, although probably not on an exam.
Well, not on
but
exams,
yeah,
like
but-
throwing it out.
Yeah, but I take responsibility.
Yeah, and we will usually, and this is probably going to be another session later on where we're going to give some tips to students on how to evaluate themselves, your own performance post-exam, to sort of go back to your questions and how you actually read that question. But what I tend to do is I provide a spreadsheet with the question number, correct answer, and then the percentage of how many students got the answer correct, right? So we can see clearly that this question was answered correctly only by, 57% of the course. Then that's a pretty tough question, right? If it's only half of them got it right. So you can gauge yourself also based on those, so you evaluate the question. Yes.
For the exams, will we actually get the hard copy back, or is it like scanned? Because I know like in some of my math classes, we didn't get the actual hard copy back. They just scanned it, so they just showed you like your answers. You don't actually get your hard copy back.
It depends, I don't know what courses.
I
how
get
you-
mine.
You will in mine.
Yeah.
I give mine back.
Yeah, so do I.
Because what's a scan form for?
Yeah.
Joy's going to tell you, it's like, I answered B, and the answer was A. Wonder what the hell the question was.
Yeah, that's not.
Yeah, that's in no way helpful.
No.
We want you to have these so you can in fact go back
Well,
and
yeah,
look.
and our finals are gonna have a semi-cumulative nature to them, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be pulling questions from exam 1 and 2, and those concepts will come
Reworking.
back. So I definitely want you to have your exams back, so you can figure out, okay, why did I miss this? Does this make sense to me, kind of thing.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
something to talk about perhaps for another session.
Yeah.
But after an exam,
There's a
not
lot
just
to be
looking
done.
at, okay, so you do have your exam questions. It's like, okay, number 3, he liked C, I liked B. I got that one wrong. No. Think about it. Why did I like C better than B?
Yeah.
Why did you like B? Figure out why that happened. And there's a lot of different reasons why that could happen. Maybe in fact the way the question was worded, although I try hard not to,
Yeah.
that in fact B makes sense. In which case, bring that to my attention. Any number of reasons. So yeah,
Yeah, and talking to your professors about it, like you said, maybe when you're saying, oh, I like B, and this made sense to me because, and then that may be,
It's like, I'll be done.
he may be like, oh my darn, oh my darn, that question is not fair, right? And that may then change the way, you know, that would alert, a lot of times that alerts us if there is an issue.
We're not here to hurt you.
No, definitely not.
We sound like physicians. We're not here to hurt you.
This will not hurt.
This won't hurt.
This won't hurt.
This won't hurt but for a second.
Well, exams 2 and 3, will they be cumulative in the sense only that all biology flows together, or will they actually interact questions?
Well, mine will.
What was the question?
Will
If,
exams 2 and 3 be cumulative?
yeah, so if all subsequent exams are cumulative, I mean, you might have some questions which rely on your prior knowledge of what an allele is, or what some basic term or concept. But directly probing, for instance, Mendel in exam 3, like Punnett squares, I do not do that.
Well, I mean, I might, in the sense that if I'm constructing a scenario where I can bring in a question on Mendelian genetics, and I can bring in a question on the population level genetics out of that same question, yeah, I might well do that. But the most important thing is that in fact knowledge is cumulative anyway.
Yeah.
But like,
Just
our
what you said.
understanding should be good enough rather than we have to rememorize whatever we needed to.
No. Yeah,
No,
good, that's a good
yeah. Any other questions, folks? We still have time, no? Oh, yeah.
We have 2 items of swag for people who are here. We're going to pull from a random number. So while you're thinking of any follow-up questions,
Nice.
we will
Swag.
do this lovely pull and see what we get here.
Can I have a cookie?
Yes, you may have a cookie
I'll
stand.
also mention that we'll do another one of these in a couple of weeks that'll be focused on learning from your exams. So those of you who are here today and are going to start studying right now, an hour a day, you might not need that one. You're going to rock your exam, but you might want to come anyway for some good study tips. So you'll hear about it from the same venues. It's also posted on Twitter, so at UTK Biology. So that's for undergraduates, and we're trying to promote that and getting the word out to you for various things to help you to be here at UT and be successful. So a representative from 150. Would you like to pick a name or pick a number?
Nice.
Do I have one? 54.
Okay, so this is, okay, so that is Brandon Rosenthal.
He left. Oh, no, he's there. Oh,
All
great.
right.
Good.
Would you like a t-shirt or a water bottle?
I'll do the shirt.
And for 160?
Number 51.
51.
Has not been randomized.
Stephanie's Sausage.
All right.
She here? Oh, okay, good, nice. Cool. All right, folks, as always, if you have additional questions, email us. Come to our offices, see us. Don't let it fester.
Lots of fun stuff.
Hey, Professor Nyari.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Uh-huh. No.
Not this Thursday. It's on a Thursday.
Review session, you mean?
No, not this Thursday. The actual exam, you said it might be on a Thursday.
No.
Not?
No. Exams are on Friday, always. What we're going to do is we're going to do like a review session before the exam. Yeah.
I know for like sure, 4 people, like we have a math exam and it's the exact time.
Auto lab, 3:30 and 6:30.
From 5:30 to 7?
It's from like 6:45 to 7.
Okay, then come to office hours and get questions.
And like I have bio lab on Thursday, 3:30 to 6:30.
Sure. Email me. Seriously, I mean, don't, yeah. If you have questions, find a way, because we can help. I mean, I can't throw out multiple dates to everybody, because there will always be somebody.
I understand. I mean, I'm not saying that just because of me, the majority.
No. But what I'm trying to say to you is don't, if you have some.
Is there like,
So in the
are you going to be having slides or anything at the review, or is it just like you guys
No,
discussing, just discussion?
Learning objectives.
Learning objectives.
Yeah, we're going to go through those because those are essentially the study or the study guides, and we're going to work through those. We're going to help you formulate some answers to those, maybe draw out some of those things. Okay?
And one more thing.
Yeah.
So last Friday, I missed class. I went to Virginia.
There's no class Friday. Wednesday. Okay, no worries.
You guys did clicker questions.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
are there like already extra clicker questions in the field? You said something, about that.
Yeah, if you miss some, that's fine. You know.
Because I went to Virginia, like one of my cousins was serious and learned.
Yeah. Yeah, English.
That's hard. There will also be assignments on master in biology later on, so
It will all make it up right now. I just want to say thank you.
See you around, sure.
Of course.
I wasn't invited to the second.
Wait, can I have a
Yes, I trust that. That's the thing. Because if you're in the exam, if you do it like, depends on, so if you take your exam with us here, usually like the time. So, I know, Gee, nothing but the best, man. Thank you guys so much.
Just people.
Yeah, 40. We're just out of the exam by then. Actually, it's out of that, so. Yeah, I feel like
I'm trying to.
Mine's usually 6 to 7:30. But we got a long Wednesday nights, which I'm thinking of changing. Yeah, it's Tuesday, Thursday. We have to stop at 9:40. It says 9:40 to 10:55.
Excellent.
But I have to stop at 10:30. So I only get 50 minutes.
Like I was sitting here, I was like,
We have to let them go because they're going to buy it.
I didn't know how we should start.
Yeah. I'm only allowed to do 2 50-minute lectures per week. I cannot keep them in and out of doing that. So the third 50 minutes can go. I can extend it for a quiz. I just don't want to give up the space for the exam because there's so much material that I'm trying to teach you guys. And it's like, I've already given up one class per week to BioLit, so I can't give up
It'll be
another one
fun.
for an exam.
So you actually do all like
Yeah, I actually am giving up 50 minutes a week for
Thank you.
Yeah, I lose 50 minutes every week so that you can go to BioLit, learn how to read it.
oh, then the special.
Yeah, I used to have 3
While they're over here.
And then all of a sudden we changed the structure and we introduced BioLit, and so we had to reduce student lecture time by 1/3. I lose 50 minutes a week. So it's really stressful to keep it all active and doing this active learning and teaching you everything and giving you BioLit. So it's just like, yeah, we're crunched. So people have kind of dealt with it differently. Some instructors are doing their exams. Some instructors are like, if they're teaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they'll teach class on Monday, Wednesday, and they'll have their exams. They don't ever need to focus on their exams. A lot of course, the lyrics allow
Crystal, you want to stop this thing?
Oh yeah, we should probably stop it. I can shorten it. I've been recording this whole time and I'm answering